Hello.
I hadn't planned on being back in town so soon. College was supposed to keep me busy all summer, an internship, summer classes, maybe a job on campus. But things fell through, like they sometimes do, and I found myself back in my childhood room with the same creaky bed, faded posters, and the smell of old books lingering in the carpet. The town hadn't changed much. Same gas stations, same cracked sidewalks, same rhythm, slow and familiar. The only thing different was me. It didn't take long before I texted Michael, my best friend since we were kids. We hadn't talked much since high school. We ended up at different schools, different lives. But he was still here, working construction with his uncle and living at home while saving for an apartment. He was the kind of guy who never really left home, and maybe never wanted to. We met up for burgers the second day I was back. Same booth at Miller's Grill. Same dumb jokes. Felt good easy. We didn't talk about the future or the past too much. Just caught up like we hadn't missed a beat. "Hey," Michael said between bites. "My mom was asking about you." I blinked. "Mrs. Carter?" He nodded. "Said you used to eat half her groceries every time you stayed over. Think she misses having a second stomach around." I laughed. "Tell her I said hi." "She's still the same," he said. "Still reads those crime novels and listens to jazz while folding laundry. Weird combination." I remembered that. The soft hum of saxophone coming from her room, and the way she'd glance at us over the top of a paperback, pretending not to eavesdrop. Back then, she'd always seemed a little distant, polite, but not overly warm. She wasn't like other moms, not overly chatty or motherly. But she had this quiet presence, calm, self-contained. A few days passed. I got into a rhythm of lazy mornings, afternoon runs, and helping my dad with small house projects. It was around noon on a Thursday when my mom sent me out to grab a few things from the grocery store. As I was leaving the store, juggling paper bags, I spotted someone bent over their trunk, struggling with 2 full bags of bottled water. I didn't recognize her right away. She wore dark sunglasses, her hair pulled into a messy bun, and she had on an oversized sweatshirt that hung off one shoulder. But when she turned, my breath caught. "Mrs. Carter?" She straightened up, blinking in the sunlight. Then her lips curved. "Noah." I nodded, smiling. "Need a hand?" She hesitated for a second, then smiled back. "I won't say no." I loaded the bags into the trunk, then offered to follow her home and help carry them inside. She protested at first, but I insisted. I wasn't in a rush. And besides, something about the moment, the familiarity of her voice, the way she said my name, made it feel right. We drove a few blocks to her house, the same one I'd been to 100 times growing up. Nothing had changed. Same flower bed, same creaky porch swing, same wind chimes rattling just a little too loud. I grabbed the bags from her trunk while she unlocked the front door. "Just bring them into the kitchen," she said over her shoulder, stepping inside. I followed, the groceries rustling in my arms. The hallway smelled like lemon soap and coffee. I paused by the kitchen entrance, trying to remember where everything went. That's when I heard the soft patter of feet behind me. I turned and froze. She stood in the hallway, barefoot, in a pale gray robe loosely tied at the waist. Her hair was damp, curling slightly at the ends like she'd just stepped out of the shower. Her face was flushed, not embarrassed, just warm. And then she smiled, tilting her head. "I was just thinking about you," she said. For a moment, I didn't move. The sentence hung in the air like it meant something more than it did. Or maybe it didn't. Maybe it was just a harmless, offhand comment. but something about the way she said it, soft, unhurried, like she meant it in a way I wasn't supposed to notice, made the room feel smaller. She stepped past me, gently brushing my arm as she entered the kitchen. "Thank you for helping," she said, opening the fridge. I followed her in, still quiet. We unpacked in silence for a few minutes. She moved slowly, methodically. Her robe shifted as she reached into cabinets, revealing hints of skin that made my throat tighten, even though I tried not to look. "I can't believe how much you've grown up," she said casually, placing a box of tea on the shelf. "Last time I saw you, you were still wearing braces." I laughed nervously. "Yeah, those were tragic times." She looked over her shoulder and smiled. "You turned out well." The compliment landed harder than it should have. Cleared my throat. "Michael said you were still here. I didn't expect to run into you today." She closed the cabinet slowly. "I'm glad you did." We locked eyes for half a second too long. Then she turned away. "Would you like some coffee?" "Sure," I said, my voice a little too fast. She brewed it in silence, and we stood in the kitchen like two people who weren't sure whether this was supposed to feel normal. The air felt thick, not uncomfortable, just charged. She handed me a mug and leaned against the counter. "How's school?" she asked. We talked about school, the town, her work-from-home job, her latest book. Normal things. But her robe remained untied just loosely enough to draw my attention more than it should have. And every time her eyes met mine, there was something in them that made me feel like I was standing in the middle of something I didn't understand yet. After 30 minutes, I stood to leave. "Thanks for the coffee," I said. She walked me to the door. "Thank you again for helping." When I stepped onto the porch, she added quietly, "Come by sometime. I'm usually around." I turned. Her smile was soft. "I'd like to catch up more." And I couldn't help but think, so would I, because something had shifted. I didn't know what it was yet, but I knew this summer was going to be different. The next few days passed in a blur of small-town sameness. Lawn mowers humming in the distance, sprinkler arcs across dry lawns, and evenings that smelled like cut grass and leftover barbecue smoke. But even with all that familiarity, something felt different now. Like the rhythm I'd fallen back into after returning from college had been disrupted. And I knew exactly what did it. Mrs. Carter. I couldn't stop thinking about that afternoon in her kitchen. The loose tie of her robe, the subtle warmth in her voice, the way she said she'd been thinking about me. It echoed in my mind at night, in the silence between the ceiling fan's slow rotations. I told myself it didn't mean anything, that she was just being kind, friendly. But then why did her smile linger in my thoughts? Why did the memory of her brushing past me, soft and almost intentional, feel like something more? I didn't mention it to Michael, not because I was hiding something, not yet anyway, but because there was nothing to tell. At least not that I could explain without sounding crazy. I wasn't even sure what I felt. Then one afternoon my phone buzzed. "Michael. Hey man, you busy?" "Me. Just got done mowing the lawn." "What's up?" "Michael. Mom needs help setting up the new bookshelf. Said she didn't want to wait until the weekend. I told her you'd probably be around." My stomach flipped. "Me? Sure. What time?" "Michael. Now if you're free. She'll be home all day." I stared at the message longer than I should have, then tossed my phone on the bed and pulled on a clean shirt. When I got to their house, the driveway was empty. For a second, I wondered if I'd read the time wrong. But before I could knock, the front door opened. Mrs. Carter stood there in leggings and an oversized white t-shirt tucked loosely into the waistband. Her hair was pulled up again, strands falling gently around her face. No makeup, or if there was, it was subtle. She smiled when she saw me. Perfect timing. "Hey," I said, trying not to sound too eager. "Michael said you needed help?" She nodded. "It's in the living room. I bought it thinking it'd be easy to assemble. I should have known better." I followed her inside. The house was cool and smelled faintly of vanilla. A long, unopened box sat against the far wall next to a scattering of tools. "Coffee?" she offered, already walking toward the kitchen. "Sure." I set my backpack down, knelt by the box, and began slicing the tape open. By the time she returned with 2 mugs, I'd already spread out the pieces and opened the instructions. She handed me a mug and sat on the armrest of the couch nearby, one foot tucked under the other, watching me. "You always good at putting things together?" she asked. I smiled. "Better than Michael, anyway." She laughed. A soft, breathy sound that made my chest tighten a little. "I believe that," she said. We made small talk while I worked, about her new job, her recent attempt at gardening, her latest obsession with baking bread. She told me the bookshelf was for the dozens of paperbacks she'd collected over the years, most of which were currently stacked in boxes in her closet. "Escapism," she said with a shrug. "Cheaper than therapy." I looked up. "Hey, nothing wrong with that." The conversation turned personal before I even noticed. She asked about school, not just the classes or the grades, but how I felt about it, what I wanted, whether I liked who I was becoming. No one asked me those kinds of questions. Not really. Not in that way. And I found myself answering honestly. More honestly than I'd expected. Maybe it was the way she listened, not just waiting to speak, but really listening. Maybe it was the comfort of being seen by someone who wasn't looking through the lens of expectation. Or maybe it was just her. At one point, I noticed her watching me closely. Her gaze wasn't intrusive, it was gentle, thoughtful, like she was trying to understand something even I hadn't figured out yet. "What?" I asked. She shook her head slightly, smiling. "You've changed." I raised an eyebrow. "Good different or bad different?" "Just grown." I didn't know what to say to that, so I looked down, focused on screwing in the last shelf bracket. By the time I stood and dusted off my hands, the afternoon sun had moved, casting long amber beams across the floor. The bookshelf stood finished, empty, waiting. She stepped beside me, close, almost touching. "You did a great job," she said. "Thanks. It was easier than I thought. Still, I appreciate you coming." Her voice was quieter now. The room felt still, like the air had changed temperature. "You want to stay for dinner?" she asked. I hesitated, not because I didn't want to, but because I did. And maybe that was the problem. "I should probably head home," I said, though my voice didn't sound very convinced. She nodded, but her eyes didn't leave mine. "I get it." She walked me to the door again. As I stepped outside, she rested her hand lightly on the doorframe. "You know you're welcome any time," she said softly. I nodded. "I know." Then I walked to my car and drove home. Windows down, heart pounding, head spinning. That night, I lay awake again, thinking not just about her robe, or her smile, or even the moment she invited me to stay, but about the way she looked at me, like she saw something no one else had taken the time to see. And I couldn't stop wondering if I was the only one who felt it, or if she felt it too. The weather shifted the following week. Thunderstorms crept in like whispers, shaking the windows at night and leaving the sidewalks slick and steaming by morning. It was the kind of summer weather that made time stretch and contract. Long afternoons with heavy air and evenings that arrived sooner than expected. Michael was working longer hours, and I didn't see him much, which left me with idle time and idle thoughts. I didn't text Mrs. Carter. I told myself I shouldn't, that it was better to wait, let things settle, whatever that meant. But on Thursday, just after lunch, I got a message. Mrs. Carter. Hey Noah, sorry to bother you, but my internet's been spotty and the router keeps blinking red. Any chance you know what to do? I stared at the screen, trying not to read between the lines. But the truth was, I wanted to. I wanted a reason to go back. A reason that wasn't just wanting to. Me? Yeah, I can take a look. I'll be there in 15. Her response was almost instant. Mrs. Carter. Thank you. You're a lifesaver. I didn't tell anyone I was going. I grabbed my keys, threw on a hoodie even though it was still warm out, and drove with my windows cracked, the air heavy with that pre-storm stillness. When I got there, her car was already in the driveway. Rain was coming. I could smell it in the air. I knocked once. She opened the door almost immediately. She wore soft black leggings again, and a loose blue sweatshirt that slid off one shoulder. Her hair was down this time, damp and curling slightly at the ends like she'd been caught in a light drizzle or had just stepped out of the shower. She smiled. You're fast. You sounded mildly panicked, I said, stepping inside. The house smelled like cinnamon and something fresh, maybe citrus. It was warm inside, lived in. Still, she led me to the living room, where the router blinked angrily beneath the TV stand. I knelt beside it, inspecting the cables. She hovered nearby, sipping from a mug, watching me work. You always this handy? She asked lightly. Only when someone's in distress, I said. She smirked, then walked to the kitchen. I just made tea. Want some? Sure, I called, adjusting a cable. Might need to reboot this thing. The lights on the router flicked green for a moment, then red again. Stubborn little box, I muttered. She returned with 2 mugs, handing me one before sitting on the couch, legs tucked under her. The tea was hot, faintly sweet, laced with something herbal I couldn't name. I think it's working, I said, standing up after a few more minutes. Miracle worker, she said, raising her mug slightly in salute. I sat in the chair across from her, letting the tea cool in my hands. Outside, the sky darkened, soft, slow, a curtain being drawn across the afternoon. You don't have to rush off, do you? She asked after a minute. No, I said without thinking. She smiled, more to herself than to me. We sat in that quiet for a while, listening to the soft tick of the kitchen clock and the far-off sound of thunder. She asked about school again, but not the usual surface-level stuff. She wanted to know what I felt, what scared me, what made me feel like I belonged. I don't think I've figured that part out yet, I admitted. She nodded slowly, her eyes distant. Takes time. Something in her tone made me pause. You sound like someone who's still figuring it out too, I said gently. She looked at me surprised, then laughed. Not loudly, but with a kind of resignation. I am, she said. Isn't that awful? You reach an age and think you're supposed to have all the answers, but really you're just better at hiding the questions. That stuck with me. I leaned forward. What are you still trying to figure out? Her eyes locked on mine. For a moment, she didn't answer. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, whether I'm still allowed to want things. The room felt suddenly smaller. Not suffocating, just closer. "I think you are," I said. Her breath hitched, the kind of pause that isn't quite a gasp, but something close. We sat like that, unmoving, until a flash of lightning lit up the room in silver blue. Rain followed a moment later, soft at first, then harder. She stood. "I should close the windows." I followed her without asking. We moved from room to room, sliding panes shut, wiping down the sills. When we reached the back door, she paused, staring out into the yard. The porch swing creaked in the wind. "You can stay until it passes," she said, her voice gentle. "I'd hate for you to drive in this." I nodded, and when we returned to the living room, I didn't sit in the chair. I sat beside her on the couch. She didn't move away. If anything, she shifted slightly closer. Her hand rested near mine on the cushion, not touching, just near enough to feel the heat of her skin. Her breath was slow, the rain tapping harder now, like it wanted to fill the silence for us. Then she spoke. "I remember when you were 15, you and Michael used to watch those ridiculous action movies in the basement. I'd come down with snacks and you'd both act like I was interrupting some sacred ritual." I laughed. "They were sacred. Bad movies are a teenage rite of passage." She smiled. "You've changed a lot since then." "So have you." Her eyes met mine, and this time neither of us looked away. Something passed between us, fragile but unmistakable. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly. "For what?" "For being this open. I don't usually talk like this." "It's okay," I said softly. "I like it." Her gaze flicked down to my hand, then back to my face. "You ever feel like someone sees you? Like, really sees you, and you don't know whether to run or stay?" I swallowed. "Yeah, I feel that right now." Her fingers moved, slowly brushing against mine. Barely a touch, just a suggestion. But that was enough. I turned slightly toward her. She mirrored the motion. The space between us collapsed. Our lips met, not in some fevered rush, not reckless or fast. It was slow, careful, the kind of kiss that doesn't ask for anything, just offers. Her hand rested on my jaw, mine found the curve of her waist, and the rain outside became nothing but distant noise. When we pulled away, our foreheads rested together. No words, just breath and silence, but the kind that says everything. We didn't speak for a while after the kiss. Not because we were avoiding it, but because the silence felt safe, complete, as if the room itself understood that any words might cheapen something too delicate to name. Eventually, she stood, walked to the kitchen, and came back with 2 fresh mugs of tea. She handed me one and sat beside me again, a little closer this time. Her leg brushed mine. Neither of us moved away. "I never thought I'd feel something like that again," she said, almost to herself. I looked at her. "I didn't expect this either." She smiled faintly, then stared into her cup like it might offer answers. "I don't want to make things weird," she said. "They're not," I replied. "Not unless we pretend it didn't mean anything." She looked up. Her eyes were softer now, but clearer. "It did," she said. "It means something." We spent the rest of that rainy afternoon wrapped in quiet conversation. Nothing urgent, nothing confessional. Just soft words and shared glances. Stories about our lives, fragments of old memories, laughter that filled the corners of the room like a familiar scent. And then, another silence. This one different, heavier, slower, charged. She leaned in first. I met her there. What followed wasn't fast or impulsive. It wasn't wild or reckless. It was gentle, unfolding like something inevitable. Not out of lust, but understanding. Out of being seen. Out of feeling alive in a way that neither of us had felt in a long time. We didn't rush. We didn't speak. The rain continued outside, steady, rhythmic. Upstairs, her bedroom door creaked open. The room was warm, dim, still carrying the faint scent of her citrus shampoo and the tea we left untouched downstairs. She kissed me again, this time slower, deeper, her hands finding their way to mine, then to my shoulders, then to the space between us. I matched her pace, her breath, her silence. There was no soundtrack, just the sound of rain on the windows, the soft exhale of breath, the wordless hum of two people crossing a line neither of them had drawn, but both had waited to step over. Later, wrapped in sheets and her skin and something else I couldn't quite define, I watched the light of the storm flicker faintly through the curtain. She lay with her head against my chest, fingers idly tracing invisible shapes across my stomach. "I don't know what this is," she whispered. "Neither do I said. "But it's real," she added. I nodded. "Yes, it's real." We didn't talk about Michael. We didn't talk about what came next. In that moment, none of that existed. There was only the warmth, the closeness, the fact that for a brief moment in both of our lives, we weren't alone. The next morning was calm. Sunlight spilled through the window, golden and quiet. She was already awake when I opened my eyes, lying beside me, watching me like she was trying to memorize something. "Good morning," I said. Her smile was small, sleepy. "Hey!" We moved slowly, getting dressed, making coffee, buttering toast. I wore one of her oversized sweatshirts, and she didn't seem to mind. In fact, she looked at me with something that felt like affection. Something more than just attraction. Something quieter, more human. But the moment couldn't stretch forever. She leaned against the counter, coffee in hand, and said softly, "We can't tell Michael." "I know. It wouldn't go well. He wouldn't understand." I nodded. "I won't say anything." She looked down into her cup. "This might have to stay between us." I didn't argue, because I knew this wasn't a love story in the usual sense. It was a moment, a chapter, a crossing of paths that maybe shouldn't have happened but did anyway. And I didn't regret it, not for a second. The rest of the summer passed in a haze of moments that felt both stolen and sacred. There were quiet check-ins, occasional errands that gave us excuses to see each other, long glances held too long, smiles that said more than words ever could. We didn't repeat that night exactly, but there were other nights, some quieter, some warmer, some where we just sat on her porch swing, not touching, not speaking, but knowing. Sometimes I wondered if she felt guilty. Sometimes I did too. But mostly what I felt was alive, seen, wanted, not in the surface level way but in that rare, deep sense. The kind that makes you question everything you thought you knew about connection. Eventually, the time came to leave. I packed my bags, said goodbye to my parents, hugged Michael and promised we'd stay in touch better this year. He never suspected anything. Never questioned the quiet glances or the way my mood seemed to rise and fall depending on a text that never arrived. I didn't see Mrs. Carter before I left. But the night before, my phone buzzed with a message. "Mrs. Carter, I'll be thinking about you." I stared at it for a long time, then replied, "Me? Same." Time moved forward as it always does. College picked up. New friends, new classes, new distractions. But nothing replaced the stillness of that summer. Nothing erased the feeling of her fingertips on my skin, or her voice in the hallway. I was just thinking about you. It was never about forever. It was about being seen. And I was, by someone I never expected. By someone who showed me that sometimes the most unforgettable chapters are the ones no one else ever reads. She was never just Michael's mom again. She was the person who, for one moment, made everything else fall away. And for that, I'll always remember her.
Bye bye.